The afternoon in Seoul was covered by a grey layer of low clouds. The wind blew between the buildings of the financial district, scattering dry leaves across the clean ground. Park Yun-ha walked slowly, her worn sneakers absorbing every impact. From the concrete. In her hands was the most expensive cell phone she had ever touched, a shiny, recent model that clearly didn't belong to her. Her gaze never left the ground, but each step echoed like a drum in her chest. When she stopped in front of the mirrored building, the reflection of her faded sweater and the stationery clip in her hair made her hesitate. She took a deep breath. She went inside. The lobby felt like a parallel world. Marble, receptionists, in suits, silent LED screens, men in suits hurried past. She approached the counter, but before she could say anything, she saw him, Seo Min-jun, tall, elegant, checking messages by the elevator. "Excuse me?" Her voice barely came out. She held out her cell phone. "You left this in the cafe." Min-jun looked up. Within seconds, his expression changed, from confusion to coldness. Then he took a step back. "Are you trying to rob me?" His voice sounded louder than he intended. The lobby froze. The receptionists looked at each other. A security guard approached. Yun-ha, paralyzed, just held the device, still extended. A murmur spread. Eyes pierced her like daggers. "I just found—" He tried to explain, but his words were lost in the thick air of judgment. Min-jun hesitated for a second. Something in his posture wavered, but he quickly regained his composure. "You can leave it there." He turned around. Yun-ha lowered her head. She bowed. She handed her phone to the security guard. Without another word, she walked out of the building with short steps. In the cold of the street, she swallowed hard. She wouldn't cry here. But inside, something cracked. Min-jun, inside the elevator, still staring into space, felt an uneasiness he couldn't name. She didn't scream. She didn't insist. She just bowed for something she didn't do. The next morning, the cafe opened under a grey sky. The breeze carried the smell of wet asphalt. Park Yun-ha swept the floor with calm movements, but the scene from the previous day machine translated by Google still seethed inside her. The accusing gaze, the security guards, the silence. She felt shame and anger, but also a strange dignity. She had done the right thing. At 10:45, the door opened with a soft chime. She looked up and froze. Seo Min-jun walked in with purposeful steps, his eyes scanning the room until he found her behind the counter. I was alone. "Park Yun-ha?" he said formally. She just nodded, surprised that he knew her name. "I was hasty." The pause between the words was more tense than the sentence itself. "I came to return what I took. Respect." Yun-ha didn't answer. She just continued to clean a cup, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. He held out an envelope. "I don't want your money," she said, without looking at him. "It's not money." He placed the envelope on the counter. "It's an invitation. HJ Holdings is reviewing its supply chain. There's a meeting with suppliers. The cafe where you work is part of it. I thought your knowledge would be useful." She stared at him for a few seconds. It was an odd offer, but there was something different in his eyes than this morning, a genuine discomfort. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity. "Why me?" he asked. "Because no one knows grains as well as you do," he said, and then hesitated. "And because I was wrong." On the envelope, the time and place were written precisely. She did not respond. He bowed slightly and left, without looking back. 2 days later, in the auditorium of an HJ Holdings building, Yun-ha walked in with hesitant steps. She was wearing her clean, carefully pressed blue sweater. She sat in the back. She recognized Min-jun among the executives. He saw her, but he didn't smile, he just nodded. During the meeting, she remained silent, observing, until a logistical detail was questioned. It was something she was familiar with. She timidly raised her hand and made a precise observation. There was silence. Then a director commented, "That's true. We hadn't noticed that point." Min-jun crossed his arms. Inside, he felt something akin to respect. Not just for what she had said, but for the silent firmness with which she occupied that space. Machine translated by Google. When the meeting ended, he approached her, but did not speak. He simply watched her leave, steady and silent, as if she were learning to walk in new territory. Over the next week, Yunha and Minjun's meetings became discreet but frequent. Not by choice, but by a tangle of circumstances that fate seemed to weave with precision. The cooperative insisted on Yunha's presence at the meetings. She knew the farmers, the grains, and the actual pace of delivery. Minjun, however, kept his distance. He watched from afar, took notes, rarely, gave his opinion when she spoke. But his eyes followed her with a restrained intensity. There was something about him that Yunha couldn't name, remorse, fascination, or just an old silence. One afternoon, after a visit to the cooperative's headquarters, Yunha got off the bus alone on the outskirts of the city. Minjun was unexpectedly waiting for her there, leaning against a discreet black car. She stopped in surprise. "Why are you here?" His voice wasn't harsh, just cautious. "I wanted to thank you," he said simply, "for the report." From the last meeting, it was clear and objective. The team was impressed. She nodded. She was tired. She wanted to go home. "Would you like a ride?" he asked. "No," he answered without hesitation. "I prefer to walk." Minjun lowered his eyes, accepting. But before she left, he said, "You're different. No one in that building cares what's inside the grain sack. Only you." Yunha didn't answer. She just bowed briefly and walked toward the alley where she lived. Minjun stood there watching her disappear into the shadows. That night, she sat in front of the small electric stove in the room she shared with her mother and thought of him, not as the man in the dark blazer, but as someone who carried his own form of loneliness too. Yunha's routine had remained the same, waking up early, making coffee, taking notes on deliveries, smiling at strangers. But now, there was a subtle difference. Sometimes she would find a note left in her counter drawer, sturdy, unsigned, writing, but with words like "thank you" and "I noticed what you did" or "good job today." It was Minjun. She knew it. And even without a response, I read them carefully. Machine translated by Google. During the third meeting with the cooperative, Yunha presented a new logistics scheme based on maps she had drawn at home. The sea. Room fell silent. A director wanted to interrupt, but Minjun raised his hand, stopping him. "Continue," he said, looking at her as if it were the first time. In the end, he spoke in a restrained tone. "Let's apply the model. Starting next week." She froze. A strange heat rose in her ears. She bowed briefly. It was a technical gesture, but behind it, something was beginning to change. As they left the room, they passed each other briefly in the hallway. Minjun's eyes met hers. There were no smiles, no words. But the silence there carried more than any long dialogue. That night when Yunha returned home, she found her mother preparing rice with anchovies, a simple but unusual dish. They spoke little. Her mother noticed that her daughter was different. "Your eyes are more awake," he said, placing the bowl in front of her. Yunha smiled but didn't answer. Inside her, something was slowly rearranging itself, as if the pieces of a puzzle were beginning to make sense. Over the weekend, the HJ Holdings team was invited to visit the cooperative's village to learn more about the farming processes. It was a suggestion from Minjun, who wanted to better understand the local impacts. To everyone's surprise, he insisted that Yunha go too. The bus wound its way through the mountainous roads as fog shrouded the countryside. When they arrived, farmers were waiting for them with hot barley tea. Yunha got off last. She was greeted with smiles. Many knew her. She was the daughter of a man who had helped build barns in the area years ago. Among the villagers, a white-haired man approached. His eyes widened when he saw Yunha. "Are you Park Jin-soo's daughter?" he asked. She nodded, surprised. The man lightly touched her arm. "Your father saved my grandson. When the roof of the building almost collapsed, he pushed the boy out. But he didn't have time for himself." His voice broke. "It was a miscalculation in the project. An intern at the company. CO something." Yunha stood still. Minjun, standing a few feet away, had heard everything. The world seemed to stop for a moment. The sounds, the faces, the mountain, breeze, everything was silenced by the revelation. Machine translated by Google. Later, on the way back to Seoul, no one spoke on the bus. Yoon-ha stared at the landscape. Min-jun, beside him, kept his gaze lowered. His fingers closed involuntarily on his knee. For the first time he felt naked, not as an heir, a CEO or an executive, but as a man. In the days after their visit to the village, Yoon-ha avoided Min-jun, at the cafe, in the office, during meetings. Her gaze remained steady but never met his again. She knew too much. Now, not just about their past, but about the scars they both bore. Min-jun, for his part, sank into silence. He attended meetings, read reports, but something in his face had fallen. Mr. Jung's words echoed in his mind. It was a miscalculation by the intern. On a rainy afternoon, Yoon-ha was sheltering under the cafe's awning, waiting for the rain to pass, when Min-jun appeared with an umbrella in his hands. "I came to see you," he said simply, extending the umbrella. She hesitated, but didn't move. "It was you, wasn't it? The intern." His voice wasn't accusatory, but it carried an ancient weight. Min-jun nodded. "I didn't know who he was until that day, but yes, it was my responsibility." The rain seemed to get heavier around them, and I never had the courage to really look at it. The silence between the two was no longer uncomfortable. It was necessary. "You don't have to forgive me," he continued, "but I needed to tell you, with my eyes open this time." She took a deep breath. She didn't answer, but she stepped forward and picked up the umbrella. "I won't forgive yet, but I don't want to carry this hatred. My father didn't deserve to be remembered with resentment." Min-jun lowered his head, a gesture of acceptance and perhaps of relief. The news spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. A blogger had posted photos of Min-jun leaving the cafe where Yoon-ha worked. The headline was cruel. HJ Holdings heir involved with suburban cafeteria server. The comments came like a flood. Insults, speculation, accusations of self-interest. Old photos of Yoon-ha, still in high school, were found on social media. A video of her serving coffee went viral. Netizens said she had set the whole thing up. Machine translated by Google. The next day, Min-jun was summoned to headquarters. The meeting room was filled with executives and directors. "This is a scandal," said one of them. "Your image is that of the company." "What if the media digs deeper?" said another. "This girl may have intentions." "Enough." Min-jun spoke softly, but his voice cut through the air. His mother was waiting for him at the end of the hallway. Madame Seo was a respectable figure, a former ambassador shrouded in discretion and pride. "Min-jun," he said coldly, "it's not too late to end this. You know what you have to lose." He stared at her for a long time. Then he simply replied, "But I also know what I can gain." Meanwhile, Yoon-ha received calls from unknown numbers, anonymous messages, and veiled threats. The owner of the cafe suggested she take a few days off. She refused. She kept going to work, even when customers whispered when they saw her. One night, he found an envelope at the door of the cafe. Inside was just one sheet of paper, an invitation to a press conference by HJ Holdings. Highlighted was the text, "Official statement from Vice Chairman Seo Min-jun." She sat down, holding the envelope in both hands. The world seemed to spin more slowly. Chapter 8. The Curve. The HJ Holdings auditorium was packed. Cameras were positioned, journalists were holding notebooks, the white glow of the lights reflected off the lenses. Seo Min-jun took the stage in a dark suit, the same one he had on the morning of the indictment, but now with a different posture. He took a deep breath. He faced the crowd. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice firm. "I'm here as the vice president of HJ Holdings, but more than that, I'm here as a man." A murmur went through the room. Min-jun continued. "Recently, my image has been linked to Park Yoon-ha. Yes, she is a cafe attendant, but she is also the most honest person I have ever met." The cameras flashed. The journalists were agitated. "I humiliated her unfairly. Later, when I tried to make amends, I was confronted with the past that my family and my company had neglected. Her father died trying to save a project where I had made a mistake. That changed me. Machine translated by Google. He paused. He stared at the lights. So I not only acknowledge my connection to her, I publicly bow down. And then, in front of everyone, Minjun bowed deeply. A rare gesture. A reverent silence fell over the room. In the cafe, the television was broadcasting the press conference. The image froze on Unha. She was standing behind the counter, the tray between her fingers. His words rang in her mind like notes from a forgotten song. She taught me what dignity means. She didn't cry, but her teary eyes said otherwise. For the first time she felt seen, and more than that, recognized. The rain that night fell lightly over Seoul. The wet streets reflected the red beams of headlights, while Minjun's footsteps echoed down the alley to the cafe. Unha was closing the door when she saw him. "I came as a client," he said, without irony. She turned around and unlocked the door. They sat across from each other. Neither of them knew where to begin. The coffee between them was slowly getting cold. Until he spoke. "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to see your eyes after everything. To know if there was still room to start over." Unha looked at her hands. She took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can forget what happened, but I also don't know if I can keep pretending that none of it touched me." He nodded. Hope was contained, fear too. "Then we can't pretend," he said, "or force it. Just start. Somewhere." She stared at him for a long time, and then in a simple gesture, she reached out a hand across the table. He didn't take it right away, but when he did, it was with care, as if holding something rare and precious. Months passed. Winter was slowly arriving in Seoul, turning the rooftops white. The cafe was now more crowded, and Unha was running the place independently. She had voice, space, presence. Minjun remained at the helm of HJ Holdings, but with a different approach. He created a foundation in the name of Unha's father, Jin-soo, dedicated to the safety of workers. Every new project now bore the foundation's seal, a silent promise that such a thing would not happen again. Machine translated by Google. They didn't live together, not yet. But they walked side by side, sometimes holding hands, sometimes just sharing the silence of a sunset in the Han. One cold morning, he appeared at the cafe with a white flower. "For you," he said, handing it over without paper, without a ribbon. She smiled. It was simple and true. "It's snowing," he commented. "I know," he replied, "but some flowers only bloom in the cold." Unha looked out the window. The snow was falling softly, quietly. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful, not perfect but possible.